October 2024. The first snow of the season had already begun falling over the mountains of Colorado. Just outside the small town of Silver Creek stood Blackwood Student Hostel, an old 4-story brick building that had housed college students for nearly 70 years. It wasn't famous for luxury or comfort. It was simply cheap, quiet, and close to the university. From the outside, Blackwood looked ordinary. Inside, it felt strangely frozen in time. The wooden hallways creaked with every step. Old fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. The walls were covered with faded photographs of former students, most of them smiling into cameras that no one had touched in decades. New students usually joked that the hostel looked more like an abandoned hospital than a place to live. Among the new arrivals were 3 friends who had transferred to Silver Creek University together. Daniel Foster was the practical one, calm under pressure, always thinking logically before making decisions. Luke Anderson was the exact opposite, funny, confident, and never afraid of anything. He loved ghost stories because he never believed any of them. Mason Reed was quiet, thoughtful, and fascinated by old buildings and local history. After checking in, the receptionist handed them a heavy brass key. "Room 110, she said. Luke smiled. "Perfect. 1 room for 3 best friends." The receptionist hesitated. Her smile disappeared for just a second. "Yes." She slowly slid the registration book toward them. "Room 110. Daniel noticed the change in her expression. "Is something wrong?" "No." She forced another smile. "Just remember one thing." The 3 friends looked at each other. "What?" The woman lowered her voice. "If someone knocks on your door exactly at 3:10 in the morning, don't answer it, no matter who you think it is." Luke laughed immediately. "What is this? Some kind of Halloween tradition?" The receptionist didn't laugh. "I've worked here for 18 years. She looked directly into Luke's eyes. "I'm not joking." An uncomfortable silence filled the lobby. Daniel thanked her politely, took the key, and the 3 friends headed upstairs. Room 110 was at the very end of the second-floor hallway. It was larger than they expected. 3 beds, 3 desks, a large wooden wardrobe, 1 window overlooking the pine forest behind the hostel. Everything looked normal, except the room felt unusually cold, even though the heater was running. Luke dropped his backpack onto one of the beds. "I like it." Mason walked toward the window. "The forest looks beautiful." Daniel placed his suitcase beside the closet. "I think we'll be fine." They spent the afternoon unpacking. By evening, they had already made friends with a few students living nearby. One of them was Emily Carter, a second-year student. When she heard they were staying in room 110, she stopped talking. "You guys got room 110? Daniel nodded. "Yeah." Emily looked genuinely worried. "If you can request another room." Luke laughed again. "Seriously, everyone keeps acting like this room is cursed." Emily didn't answer. Instead, she quietly left. Luke shook his head. People really know how to scare freshmen. That night, heavy snow covered the campus. The hostel became unusually quiet. Around midnight, Daniel finished studying. Luke was watching a movie with headphones. Mason had already fallen asleep. Everything seemed perfectly normal. At 2:45 a.m., Daniel turned off his desk lamp. The room fell into darkness. Only the pale moonlight entered through the window. Minutes passed. Silence. Then, exactly 3:10 a.m., a soft knock echoed through the room. Daniel opened his eyes. He thought he had imagined it. Then came another 3 slow knocks. Luke removed one headphone. "You guys hear that?" Nobody answered. Another 3 knocks, this time louder. Daniel checked his phone. 3:10 a.m. The receptionist's warning instantly came back to him. Luke stood up. It's probably someone messing around. Daniel quickly grabbed his arm. Don't, Luke smiled. You actually believe that story? He walked toward the door. Mason suddenly woke up. What are you doing? Opening the door. Daniel stepped in front of him. Just wait. The knocking stopped. Complete silence. Luke rolled his eyes. See? He slowly unlocked the door, then pulled it open. The hallway was empty. No footsteps, no students, no sound, only the long corridor illuminated by flickering ceiling lights. Luke leaned outside. Hello? Nothing. He walked several feet down the hallway. Still nothing. Daniel looked both directions. There wasn't a single person. The three friends returned inside. Luke laughed. Someone knocked and ran away. Daniel wasn't convinced. The hallway had been too quiet. The next morning, something strange happened. Mason was brushing his teeth when he noticed wet footprints outside room 110. Bare footprints, leading toward their door. But none of them were wearing shoes when they had opened it. The footprints stopped directly in front of room 110. There were no footprints leading away, only coming toward it. Luke frowned. That's impossible. Daniel looked carefully. The floor beyond the footprints was completely dry. It looked as if someone had walked to their door and simply disappeared. That afternoon, they asked the janitor about room 110. The old man became unusually serious. You boys should sleep somewhere else, Luke sighed. Another warning? One picture caught his attention. 3 young men standing together. The photo was dated. October 1998. One of the faces looked strangely familiar. Very familiar. Mason stared for several seconds, then suddenly realized why. The student in the center looked almost exactly like Daniel. Not similar. Almost identical. Mason felt a chill run down his spine. He quickly called the others, but when Daniel and Luke arrived, the photograph was gone. Only an empty nail remained on the wall. Daniel looked at Mason. Are you sure you saw it? Mason nodded slowly. I swear. Luke tried to joke. Maybe you're already seeing ghosts. But for the first time since arriving, even Luke's smile didn't look convincing. That night, at exactly 3:10 a.m., the knocking returned. Only this time, a quiet voice came from the other side of the door, almost like a whisper. Daniel, the 3 friends froze. The voice spoke again, soft, calm, and terrifyingly close. Please, let me in. The whisper outside the door was so soft that, for a moment, none of the 3 friends were sure they had actually heard it. Then it came again. Daniel, please, let me in. The voice sounded familiar, not because Daniel recognized it, but because it sounded like someone speaking from the other side of a thick wall, almost as if the person wasn't really standing in the hallway at all. Luke slowly stood up. Someone's messing with us. Daniel grabbed his wrist before he could reach the door. No, Luke looked at him. You heard the receptionist. You heard the janitor. We're not opening that door again. For nearly a minute, nobody moved. The whisper stopped. The hallway became completely silent. Finally, Luke walked to the peephole. He looked outside. Nothing. The hallway was empty. Not a single person. He slowly backed away from the door. I don't get it. The next morning, none of them mentioned the whisper to anyone. Instead, they decided to visit the university library. If room 110 really had a history, it had to be recorded somewhere. Mason spent nearly 2 hours searching through old newspapers stored on microfilm. Most articles mentioned nothing unusual, until he found one from October 1998. The headline read, Student missing after night at Blackwood Hostel. The missing student's name was Nathan Cole. According to the report, Nathan had been living in room 110 with 2 roommates. One night, he disappeared without leaving behind his phone, wallet, or clothes. Police searched the building, the nearby forest, and even the frozen river outside town. They never found him. The case was officially closed 1 year later. Luke frowned. So one guy disappeared almost 30 years ago. Daniel shrugged. That doesn't explain anything. But Mason kept reading. A second article, published just a week later, made his heart sink. Nathan's 2 roommates had both withdrawn from the university. Neither of them ever agreed to another interview. One sentence caught Mason's attention. Both students insisted that their roommate returned after he disappeared, despite security footage proving otherwise. Daniel slowly looked up. What does that even mean? Nobody had an answer. That evening they returned to the hostel. The receptionist looked relieved to see them. You boys look tired. Daniel forced a smile. Long day. As they walked toward the stairs, she quietly said, If you hear your own name tonight, she paused. Don't answer. Luke stopped walking. How do you know about that? The woman looked confused. I didn't say anything. You just told us not to answer if we hear our names. Her face turned pale. She slowly shook her head. I never said that. Without another word, she hurried into her office and locked the door. The 3 friends stood there in complete silence. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. Around 2:50 a.m., he noticed something strange. Luke's bed was empty. Mason, Daniel whispered. Mason opened his eyes. Luke's gone. They searched the room. The bathroom was empty. The hallway was empty. Then, they heard footsteps coming from downstairs. Slow, bare footsteps. The 2 friends followed the sound to the first floor. At the end of a narrow hallway, they saw Luke standing completely still. He was facing a large mirror. His back was toward them. Luke? He didn't move. Daniel walked closer. Luke! Still nothing. When Daniel finally placed a hand on Luke's shoulder, Luke suddenly gasped. He spun around in terror. What are you doing here? Daniel stared at him. What are we doing here? What are you doing? Luke looked confused. I was asleep. No, you weren't. You've been standing here. Luke slowly looked at the mirror. Then his face lost all color. There were, he whispered, 3 people standing behind me. Daniel and Mason looked into the mirror. There were only 2 reflections. Theirs, Luke's reflection, wasn't there. For nearly 3 seconds, the mirror reflected only Daniel and Mason. Then, Luke's reflection suddenly appeared, exactly where it should have been. Nobody spoke. They quietly walked back upstairs. The following afternoon, Mason decided to search the hostel's basement. The old janitor reluctantly unlocked the door. I shouldn't let you down here. The basement smelled of damp concrete and rust. Dust covered everything. Old furniture, broken lockers, abandoned filing cabinets. In one corner sat dozens of cardboard boxes filled with student records. Mason searched through them for almost an hour. Finally, he found a faded maintenance log from 1998. One page had been folded. On it was a handwritten note. Room 110 repeated knocking reported. Students claim someone calls their names after 3:10 a.m. Recommendation, keep room vacant. Below the note, someone had written another sentence in red ink. It doesn't want the room. It wants a 3rd roommate. Mason's hands began shaking. That evening, Daniel noticed Luke acting strangely. Luke kept staring out the window toward the dark forest. Every few minutes, he smiled, not a normal smile, a distant, almost empty smile. Daniel finally asked, "What are you looking at?" Luke answered without turning around. "Someone's waiting." Daniel felt cold. "Who?" Luke smiled wider. "He says we've met before." Mason immediately stood up. "Who's he?" Luke slowly turned around. "I don't remember his name, but he remembers mine." At that exact moment, every light in room 110 went out. Darkness swallowed the room. A loud bang! The bedroom door slammed shut by itself. The heater stopped. The room became freezing cold. Then, 3 slow knocks echoed from inside the wardrobe. The 3 friends stared at the old wooden doors. None of them moved. The knocking came again, this time louder. Daniel slowly reached for the wardrobe handle. He took a deep breath and pulled the doors open. The wardrobe was completely empty. Except for one thing. Scratched into the back wall of the wood were 6 chilling words. "One of you was never supposed to leave." The 3 friends stood frozen, staring at the message. None of them noticed that Luke was quietly smiling again, as if someone standing just behind Daniel and Mason had whispered something only he could hear. Daniel and Mason couldn't stop staring at the words carved inside the wardrobe. "One of you was never supposed to leave." When they turned toward Luke, he was no longer smiling. Instead, he looked confused. "What?" Daniel frowned. "You were smiling." Luke shook his head. "No, I wasn't." Mason looked at him carefully. "Luke, are you feeling okay?" "I've never felt worse." His face looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept for days. For the first time since moving into room 11. "Oh," Luke admitted something. "I've been hearing someone every night." Daniel stepped closer. "What do you mean?" Luke swallowed. "He talks to me after 3:10. "What does he say?" Luke hesitated. "He says, 'I'm finally home.'" The next morning, the 3 friends packed their bags. They had made up their minds. They were leaving room 110. The receptionist looked relieved. "I was hoping you'd make that decision." Daniel asked her one final question. "Tell us the truth. What happened in room 110? The woman remained silent for several seconds. Then she quietly answered. "My father worked here in 1998. He told me the missing student wasn't the first." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "What?" She nodded. "Every few years, 3 students move into room 110. Then strange things begin. And eventually, only 2 of them truly leave." Daniel immediately called the local police department. An older detective agreed to meet them that afternoon. His name was Detective Howard Briggs. When Daniel mentioned room 110, the detective's expression changed instantly. "I hoped I'd never hear that room number again." He opened an old evidence box that had been sitting untouched for years. Inside were photographs from 1998. Daniel carefully picked one up. It showed 3 college students standing in front of Blackwood Hostel. The student in the middle was Nathan Cole. The one on the left looked almost exactly like Daniel, not similar, identical. Daniel stared at the photograph in disbelief. "This has to be impossible," Detective Briggs sighed. "That's exactly what the roommates said back then." He slid another photograph across the table. It showed room 110 after Nathan disappeared. On the wall, someone had written in large letters, "The third never leaves." That evening, the 3 friends returned to the hostel one last time to collect the rest of their belongings. The hallways were unusually quiet. Most students had gone home for the weekend. As they entered room 110, the door closed behind them with a loud click. Daniel tried the handle. Locked. The lights flickered. The room temperature dropped instantly. Then, the old digital clock on Daniel's desk changed by itself. 3:09 a.m. Even though it was only 7:40 in the evening, the seconds began counting down. 3:09:55, 3:09:56, 3:09:57. Luke suddenly grabbed his head. "He's here." Daniel turned. "Who?" Luke looked toward the bedroom door. "He's outside." The countdown reached 3:10:00. 3 slow knocks echoed through the room. This time, the voice wasn't outside. It came from every wall, every corner, every shadow. "Luke, it's time." Luke slowly walked toward the door. Daniel grabbed him. "Don't!" Luke's eyes filled with tears. "I can't stop." His body continued moving, as if someone invisible were pulling him forward. Mason wrapped both arms around him. Together they dragged him away from the door. Then, the knocking stopped. Silence. Complete silence. Suddenly, the wardrobe doors burst open. Inside stood a young man wearing faded university clothes from another era. His face was pale. His eyes were completely black. He looked no older than 20. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the room. "I waited so long for my replacement." Daniel whispered, "Nathan." The figure smiled. "No." Nathan left. I stayed. The room shook violently. Pictures fell from the walls. Glass shattered across the floor. The ghost slowly raised one hand toward Luke. "You belong with me." Luke screamed as an invisible force dragged him across the floor toward the wardrobe. Daniel and Mason pulled with everything they had. The wooden floor beneath Luke's body cracked. The ghost's shadow stretched across the room like black smoke. Then, Daniel remembered something. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the old photograph Detective Briggs had given him. He held it up. "You've been forgotten. You don't belong here anymore." The ghost stared at the photograph. For the first time, its expression changed. Confusion, then anger, then unbearable pain. The image began burning with a bright white light. The room shook harder. The ghost let out a terrifying scream that echoed through the entire hostel. The wardrobe split down the middle with a deafening crack. A freezing wind rushed through the room. And then, everything stopped. The lights returned. The temperature became normal. The wardrobe split down the middle with a deafening crack. A freezing wind rushed through the room. And then, everything stopped. The lights returned. The temperature became normal. The room was silent. The ghost was gone. The very next day, Blackwood Student Hostel permanently sealed Room 110. Heavy steel plates were bolted across the entrance. Students were told the room had suffered structural damage. No one questioned it. Daniel, Luke, and Mason transferred to another residence hall and never spoke publicly about what happened. Years passed. Life slowly returned to normal. Or so they believed. 5 years later, a construction company purchased the old hostel to renovate the building. Workers removed the steel plates covering room 110. When they forced the door open, the room was completely empty. No furniture, no beds, no wardrobe, only clean wooden floors. The foreman laughed. "Looks like the stories were nonsense." The workers left for the evening. Security cameras continued recording overnight. The next morning, one worker noticed that the door to room 110 was standing open. The security footage was reviewed. At exactly 3:10 a.m., 3 soft knocks echoed from inside the empty room. Then, without anyone touching it, the door slowly opened. A young man wearing old university clothes stepped into the hallway. He looked directly at the camera, smiled, and whispered, "I'm still waiting for the third roommate." The recording ended with static. No one ever identified the young man. And to this day, no construction crew has agreed to work alone near room 110 after dark.